Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Naveed Hussein. I am a divorce attorney here in Chicago. And today I wanted to talk about a controversial topic. And really, I'm not going to be talking about the fiqh of having a second wife, but really the legal implications. So these are text messages and calls that I get all the time as it relates to how do I get a second wife? What are the legal implications of it? What are the pros? What are the cons? How can I establish that? So today I just want to talk about that generally. What the legal implications are. And so really the first way that people typically introduce or think about this topic of having a second wife is that they have a first wife that they are legally married to, right? Legally married to meaning that they got married under the state law of somewhere, right? Whether that's a foreign country or that's in America. And typically that involves getting a license, having it solemnized and having it registered. And now you are legally married to that one spouse. And we understand that in America, having two wives is illegal. But the question is that when you marry this second wife, obviously you're not going to go through the state. You're not going to have the state involved in that second marriage. And typically what you have is a nikah, right? Where you have an imam, maybe you have a few witnesses, and now you are married to this second wife, Islamically speaking, right? So in this particular scenario, where you have one quote-unquote legal wife and one quote-unquote Islamic wife, okay? So the first question that arises is that, is this legal? And I think that there's an argument that this may be on the gray line, right? Because when it comes to the state says that any marriage has to be licensed in Illinois, or it has to be licensed by the state. That's why you have to go to the courthouse. That's why you have to obtain a license so that you have the ability now to get married. So the first hoop to jump through is whether the second marriage is going to be against that law, okay? And the reality is that this law is not really enforced, right? You don't have like special forces going out and looking for people who have married a second wife, okay? So I think that the liability of having a second wife, at least from the perspective of criminal liability, is pretty low. But there are other legal implications, right? The first legal implication is going to be that obviously this second wife that you just have a nikah with, the state does not recognize them. They're not eligible for any benefits. They're not going to get any health insurance. They're not going to get any inheritance rights unless you write it in a will, you know, hospital visits, those types of things. So many of the rights that you want to give to the second wife are not going to come automatically, but may have to be done through contracts or wills and things like that. The other problem that you face is that if you divorce your first wife, okay, they can claim that any of the money that you spent on the second wife, okay, the marriage or any nafaqah or any gifts or anything that you give to them, if the first wife divorces you or you divorce them, they can claim something called dissipation, right? And basically say that, look, this person is cheating on me, quote unquote, and they have wasted our money, and therefore I should get 50% refund or a 50% credit for any of the money that was used on the second spouse, okay? So that's probably the biggest harm or the biggest exposure that somebody has from a legal perspective going through a divorce with your first wife is the money that you spend on the second wife, okay? I've heard of people, and I've talked about this as well, is how can you make sure that this second wife is actually going to be protected? Right, so that's where you might hear of partnership agreements or LLC agreements, creating a business and things like that. But again, if you're going to create a business with your second wife during your marriage, your first wife has a claim to that business, the claim to those assets, a claim to that income. And really the only way to save this would be to have a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement with your first wife, with your legal wife, to make sure that those assets that you have with your second wife are going to be protected from the first marriage, okay? So I would say that in this situation where you have a legal wife and you have a Islamic wife, a prenuptial agreement is going to be very important with your first wife to ensure that the money that is being spent on the second wife is not claimed as dissipation and that she does not have a claim to it, okay? So this is kind of the typical way that a lot of guys, I guess, are trying to have a second wife. Another way that people have multiple wives is that they don't legally marry any of their wives, okay? they don't legally marry their first wife, they don't legally marry their second wife. Rather, they just get a nikah done, and now they're Islamically married. Okay? Now, this, I think, lessens the exposure of the assets being commingled and claims of dissipation and things like that. But you have to be concerned about something called putative spouse in Illinois and other states that might have common law marriage, right? So if you marry somebody, you have a ceremony, you live together, you file joint tax returns and things like that, there may be a way that the wife can still claim the rights of a married woman, be that alimony, be that splitting of property and things like that, because they were in the good faith belief that they were married, right? So if you go to a masjid and you have this big reception, you have this nikah, you never got a license, that might not be a saving grace for you, right? There might still be something in the law like putative spouse or common law that this spouse can now claim that they are legally married to you. And now in this scenario, if you have two wives, one that the first wife, second wife, but neither of them are legally married, they can still try to make a claim of common law marriage or putative spouse. Okay? Now, in terms of this scenario, right, when you have two non-legal wives, I think the whole thing about LLCs and partnership agreements when it comes to assets becomes a little bit cleaner, right? Because now you have an agreement between you and your wife as to what belongs in this LLC. You have one LLC with this wife, you have one LLC with the other wife, and now that allows you to own property together, that allows you to have a business relationship, income, whatever else needs to be derived from that LLC, can be a possibility and something that may work for you. So I guess that's all to say that there are certain legal implications of having a second wife. In terms of my position, right, like I said in the beginning, I'm not addressing the fiqh of this. I know certain scholars promote it, other scholars say that it's not allowed in America. That's not really part of the discussion. Even personally, in terms of my own opinions, I mean, that's not necessarily relevant here. I really just wanted to address the legal implications of having a second wife, and what that might result in, right? If you divorce your first wife. Obviously, if you're divorcing your second wife, who is not legally married to you, there might not be much legal implication. There might not be any problems there in terms of dissipation and things like that, especially if you're already married to the first wife. So with that, inshallah, if there's any other questions, please let me know. This is a common question that I get very, very often, so I thought I'd address it in a video so that I don't have to keep on answering the same question. To the sisters, again, I'm not trying to promote anything or not promote anything. I'm just giving my insight into the legal implications of having a second wife. Until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.